Over the years, our kids have had a lot of illnesses. 6 kids means a lot of childhood sniffles and coughs. And when our kids weren't feeling well, it affected our entire home. Luckily, some clever guys in Brisbane have come up with the perfect solution: Rehydrate.
Rehydrate are delicious drinks that rehydrate up to 3 times faster than water alone, packed with essential electrolytes. Rehydrate is one of the few rehydration products that is safe for all ages. Stock up at Coles and be prepared whenever illness strikes.
A life without passion is a life that's filled with struggles and challenges. They've got to find things that they're passionate about. And so much of my research with adolescents shows that they're tired, they're bored in school, and it just breaks my heart that they don't have passion.
It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, I'm Dr. Justin Coulson, and I'm joined today by my co-host and my wife, Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie Coulson. We're the parents of 6 kids. I've authored 6 books about raising happy families.
Someone we've loved chatting to over the course of this month is Marc Brackett.
Professor Marc Brackett, thank you very much.
Marc is an emotional, I go to say that all the time, emotion, not emotional. He's an emotion scientist.
He's not an emotional scientist. No.
He might be.
Now and then he is.
Yes. Yeah. But he's an emotion scientist, and he's a professor and the director of the Yale Centre of Emotional Intelligence. So he's pretty switched on with this stuff.
He knows this stuff. We spoke to Marc last week about emotional intelligence.
Your kid did not trigger you. You constructed that trigger, right? Because 5 people may watch that kid behave. Like, that's an important piece for parents to understand.
And as you heard, Marc spoke a lot about the triggers that can set us off in our parenting journey. We've got Marc back for one last chat before Christmas because frankly, we love talking to him and he's got so much wisdom. Marc, thank you so much for being with us again. We really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be on your podcast, and I hope it's helpful.
I'd love to find out more about how we can regulate those emotions and stop being triggered so easily.
Yep.
It seems to be like the peak word at the moment, 2020.
It's peak 2020.
We're all being triggered.
So important is not, calm is not always the answer, right? Sometimes you want to be high energy, and sometimes you want to show your anger because there is something there's a fire in the house, right? But I think it's really about the parents, number one, being very highly self-aware, right? For example, during this coronavirus, COVID crisis, I have become so aware of my own triggers, like more than I ever have before, because I'm in quarantine with my family. I'm not used to being home like I'm home right now. My mother-in-law is living with us. She's not supposed to be living with us, but she got stuck here because she can't get back to Panama. And so it's like, wow, Marc, like maybe you need to enter the day through the lens of your best self as a husband. What would that look like? And so that's a strategy that we ask parents to do, is just take a moment and think about the parent that you want to be. How do you want to be seen? How do you want to be talked about? How do you want to be experienced as a parent? And literally just spend time writing out the words. Compassionate, loving. I did some research on this recently, and the number one word, at least here in America, is patient. Every parent is just they've lost their patience. So when you wake up in the morning, maybe you draw the word patience in your mirror in your bathroom. You're like, today, when I walk down for breakfast, I'm going to be the patient dad, the patient mom. I'm going to be caring, I'm going to be loving, I'm going to be compassionate. And we know that helps, right? It's a prevention strategy, because so much of our emotion regulation is about reaction, right? It's about not being prepared and then boom. Instead, we're asking people, be preventionists, right? Think about your best self in advance. And then if you enter through that lens, I do that with my mother-in-law because she's driving me out of my mind. And I work outside now in the backyard once in a while, and then I have to come in and it's a meal, and then it's a whole thing with the meal. And so I'm like, Marc, you are the best freaking son-in-law that ever existed. That's the self that you're going to present. And then, 90% of the time it works, 10% I'm like a mess. But, 90% is pretty good. So that's a really good piece, I think, for parents to understand, is be your best self. I can't say that enough. And then you have to learn the strategies. You have to know how to do the breathing exercises to deactivate. You've got to take care of yourself. You've got to get the sleep in. You've got to get the eating healthy in. You've got to get the movement in. And importantly, you've got to have the cognitive strategies. And I think that it's an injustice that we have not taught everyone how to engage in more positive self-talk and reframing.
Marc, could you give us an example of both positive talk and reframing?
So one thing that research shows is that if you distance yourself from your emotion, so like I'm triggered and I like, Marc, you're the feelings master. Marc, you're the director of the Center for Emotional Intelligence. I say things to myself that remind me of my best self.
And what you're doing there, so I've interviewed Ethan Cross from University of Michigan, who's all about this psychological distancing, creating distance between yourself and the emotion. His PhD supervisor was Walter Mischel, the marshmallow experiment guy, all about emotional and self-regulation. And what you've just done is you've talked to yourself in the third person. You're not saying, come on, you can do this. You're actually creating distance by saying, Marc, you are the director of the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence. You know how to do this. You've created that distance. And I love that. Just a simple positive self-talk where it's almost someone else talking to you to remind you.
100%. It's empathy. You're sending yourself some empathy. The other piece, the reframing piece or the reappraisal piece is work by James Gross, another guru in emotion regulation, is just trying to see it from a different perspective.
Yeah.
So, for example, like my mother-in-law is here from Panama. She's been here for 6 months. She misses her home desperately. She has a dog, a cat, dirt. I don't know what else she's got in her house. And she's like, does she speak Spanish? She doesn't speak English. So she's like trapped. I speak Spanish, but I get tired of speaking Spanish by like dinner time. And so like my brain is like, I can't do Spanish tonight. And then we get into arguments because she doesn't feel included. And so my point here is that I'm like, all right, Marc, just take a moment and think about what it feels like to be your mother-in-law right now.
This is a beautiful example of empathy and compassion.
Totally. And then it's like, my goodness, like I'm working all day. I'm busy. I have a full career. She's sitting here, trapped in our house, not speaking the language, not having friends, not wanting to go outside because of, fears of getting the virus. Like maybe you need to take her out for dinner, or maybe you need to like really give her some treats, or maybe you need to talk to her in a more kind way, or give her options. And so I actually was doing that last week. I'm thinking, all right, what can I do for her? Like I took her shopping, and I'm like, all right, let's be creative with dinners. And so just trying to reappraise my relationship. And so parents, for example, like my father with me, when I was yelling and screaming and crying because I hated school and I was in karate and I failed my yellow belt test, like instead of saying, son, march back in there, or toughen up, maybe my father could have said something like, wow, my son is really struggling right now. Let me remind him how like great he is as a writer, or how really, how fabulous he is as a brother. And maybe I should like not be so selfish and spend a half hour with my kid on the weekends, like practicing the punches that he just failed. Look at that. That's a whole different level of engagement, with your child that not only validates their feelings, but helps them to grow and helps you build a positive relationship with them.
We're talking to emotions scientist Marc Brackett on today's Happy Families podcast. We'll continue our conversation with him in just a minute. For a happier family, try a Happy Families membership, because a happy family doesn't just happen. Details at happyfamilies.com.au.
On today's Happy Families podcast, we're talking with Yale University emotion scientist Marc Brackett about regulating our emotions and not being so triggered as parents. So, Marc, just to sum up our discussion so far, if we want to emotionally regulate as parents whose children can sometimes frustrate us, what I obviously need to do is look after myself. So I've got to make sure I'm not too tired, not too stressed, make sure that I'm eating well, exercising, making sure that my life is in balance, which, it's all so easy. No small feat, right? But secondly, there's these strategies where essentially I want to remind myself to be my best self. And when I'm starting to find myself being triggered, because the children are driving me crazy and I'm allowing them to get the better of my emotions, I need to remind myself, create that distance and then have some empathy for what it must be like for them.
I think you just did a great summary.
Fantastic.
And I think that's if you can master that, my hunch is that you're going to have better health, you're going to have better well-being, better relationship, make better decisions. I think from our research, we know that people with more developed skills in this area of emotion regulation, just their lives are just better.
Yeah, they do better at school, they do better in their relationships, they achieve more, they feel more contented in their lives.
They get feedback better at work, they have, richer conversations with their loved ones, everything.
Mark, can I ask you a real life question?
Well, I thought we only have a little bit of time to talk.
Now, I know that you've got dogs and you don't have children, but I know that you're also an uncle. And so you've got a couple of nieces and nephews that you are interacting with regularly. So can you tell me what has been one of the more trickier moments?
I think it's feedback from my brothers and sisters about their parenting. Because you're, as the outside observer who's not a parent, right, it's very hard to give parenting advice. And so I try not to give advice like that. I try to say, well, what the research shows, this is not Mark's opinion, this is what the science shows.
Not always well received. That's fine. I don't care what the science says. This is what happens in my house.
Yeah, truthfully, they both come to me.
Oh, really?
Regularly.
Yeah.
To just talk through problems. They're both in high school now. My 3 nieces and nephews, they're struggling. And, they're struggling with their feelings. I have one niece who's adopted, and right now she's from Peru, from Guatemala, and we've got a lot of racism here in the United States right now, and a lot of injustices, and she's self-conscious about the skin color, her skin color, and we've had some really heart-to-heart conversations that I think are just so important to have.
So good that you get to be the Uncle Marvin in Uncle Mark form.
I'm trying to live up to what my uncle did for me.
As an uncle, what do you want to instill in your nieces and nephews?
My prayer, and I will work at this, is that they are passionate about whatever they want to do in their lives. I think that a life without passion is a life that's filled with struggles and challenges. So I'm just try to push gently and kindly for them to find their passion, not their purpose. I think they're too young to have purpose. But I think that they've got to find things that they're passionate about. And so much of my research with adolescents shows that they're tired, they're bored in school, and it just breaks my heart that they don't have passion.
Thanks again, Mark, for giving us a little bit more of your time. If people want to get more information about you, where should they go?
I think just my website is the easiest because it has links to everything I do, from the center to our apps to our tools. It's just Marc with a C, M-A-R-C, Brackett, BRACKETT.com.
It's been great to chat with Marc Brackett again. We've had him on a few times now, and every time I take away some gems. Just towards the end, Marc mentioned his Uncle Marvin, who was a huge influence in his life. If you want to hear about the impact of Uncle Marvin, you might want to go back to one of our first chats we had with him earlier this month, episode 155, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, that was right. We hope you've enjoyed the podcast too, by the way. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd be so grateful if you'd visit Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. It's the reviews that help people to find the podcast and have happier families. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Roulon from Bridge Media. Thanks for making us sound great, Justin. I love saying Roulon and trying to make it sound like I'm French. Justin Roulon from Bridge Media. Our executive producer is Craig Bruce. If you'd like more information about how we can help your family to flourish, especially if you would like to join up with our Happy Families memberships and get ongoing monthly support, you can find all the info at happyfamilies.com.au.